Welcome back to Dion Talk. Why is it so freaking hard to buy a house in 2024? No, really, I'm asking. I'm going to go over why it's so hard to buy a house in 2024. And for the people who like to get the information in less than a minute, I'm going to try to do that. But at the end of the video, I'm going to talk about the solutions to living in a time when it's hard to buy a house. The actual answer to why is it hard to buy a house in 2024 is supply and demand. But there is a lot of things impacting supply and demand. So it's not just how many houses there are and how many people want to buy a house. That is not how supply and demand works when it comes to housing. And yes, I often talk to investors trying to buy rentals like duplexes, fourplexes, those kind of things. But right now, what is impacting the housing market is making it hard for home buyers and investors. Sorry, Jason, hit the wrong button. And why is it so hard to buy a house right now? There's a couple things impacting it, and some of them are on purpose. In 2020, we had a 30% stock market crash. We had a pandemic hitting everybody. We had an eviction moratorium. We had rent freezes. And as the economy would basically be grinding to a halt, the solution to keep things going was to lower federal interest rates. And so most of us are struggling to buy right now because home prices shot up when rates went down. Again, supply and demand is going to impact this too. And so right now we have those inflated home prices from a year or two when interest rates were low and there wasn't a lot of supply, but demand was there because interest rates were low. And now interest rates have doubled or tripled, but home prices haven't changed. So one of the first things impacting supply and demand is after 2008. I want you to understand that pretty much every year of my life, there has been a reason why it is not a good time to buy a house or an investment property. And yes, years go back to before I was born, but let's just cover the last decade. Since 2008, when we had a recession caused by a housing crash, a lot of toxic debt, and remember, 4 out of the last 6 recessions, home prices went up. So it is actually an anomaly that home prices go down during a recession. But it makes sense when the the housing market causes the recession that yes, prices would go down. So what did that do? That created a decade where building was decimated. We had from 70 to 80 over 25 million, 80 to 90 over 25 million, 90 to 2000 over 25 million, 2000 to 2010 over 25 million. And then in the decade before the events of 2020, we're 20 million short on just builds. A lot of this was the debt structure. A lot of this was home prices going down, so there's no motivation for people to build. So we have this decade, the missing decade of inventory, but that's not actually the only cause of the supply and demand issues that are making it really hard to buy a house right now. Because if we look at this on just its core elemental kindergarten level, home prices are high and interest rates are high. That makes it very hard to buy a house. I totally get it. At the end of this video, I'm going to go over 2 things that I did to buy my last deal and things I'm encouraging people to do now to find their next house you're going to move into or rental that you're going to buy. The first thing is a lot of people think there is no supply because big corporations are buying up all of the houses. Yes, big corporations are buying some, but the majority of homes are owned by homeowners and small mom and pop landlords. An example is someone like me. I retired in 2022 with 16 rental units. Sounds like I took 16 homes off the market. I own 1 single family house. The rest are duplexes, triplex, and a fourplex. How many homes did I actually take off the house? Just the one that I bought. That is now a rental to a Section 8 tenant who is very happy that there is a rental available for them to use their voucher for. So yes, it is becoming more and more common that large corporations are owning rentals. As of 2021, 2022, it was about 1.6% of properties were owned, residential properties were owned by corporations. The other idea is, so corporations shouldn't own, landlords shouldn't own, But if we get into why is there such a supply and demand issue? Why is it so freaking hard right now to buy a house? Because we've always had landlords. We've always had corporations that can and do own rentals. But so we're missing the builds by decade. What happened in 2020? We had interest rates drop down to below 3%, to where we have statistics like, and I'll probably grab the wrong picture because they're really small here. Let me see if this is even the right one. So 40% of homes don't have a mortgage. So if you have a house right now and you don't have a mortgage, this could be the person who's older and they want to sell to downsize, or they want to sell because their family's growing. But now you want to go buy a house in a market that has high prices, because we had the prices driven up with low rates in 2020, 2021. And then we have high interest rates because, and I'll talk about why are interest rates up, because the idea is housing is more expensive and harder to get on purpose. Like they're doing this on purpose. The housing market has ground to a halt. We're seeing a crash in transactions, not prices, on purpose. So you have 40% of the homes out there, the residential homes, they don't want to sell, right? You used to have, when a person retires, they take their 4 or 5 bedroom house, they put it on the market, they buy a 2-bedroom house in a place with a better climate. So they downsize, which creates a 1-for-1 transaction. They're selling the larger home for the person who's, I'm going to talk about in a minute, the move-up buyer, and then they buy the retirement place. Well, right now, if you have 40% of people don't have a mortgage, interest rates are 6 or 7%, home prices are up, you're going to keep the 4 or 5 bedroom house. Yeah, you're going to have a couple rooms you don't use, and it's a little harder to clean. But there's not a big enough benefit to downsizing in retirement. So this is the retirement trap. Then you have this is probably the wrong one. The people who do have mortgages, we're being impacted now as a country because one of the best benefits we have in the United States that a lot of countries just don't have is 30-year fixed rate debt. You can lock in an interest rate, and I hear this often from people in the UK and Canada. Met some Canadians in Vegas, and she actually called it Canada, so I feel justified. They call it, oh yeah, no, we have fixed rate debt. You can fix it for 5 years. That's not fixed rate debt. Fixed rate debt has one interest rate to the death of the loan, mortgage, death of the loan. Until death do us part. I hope all of my rental properties perform better than all of my marriages. So 80% of mortgages have a rate less than 5%, 90 have less than 6%. But here's the big thing, a third of the current mortgages out there, and this is most of my portfolio, are under 3%. So the move-up buyer, so we have the retirement people trapped because downsizing doesn't make a lot of sense. But you have the move-up buyer, the people who are going to add a family member, the people who are increasing their income and going to move to a better place. The cost increase of the better place with the high value, the high interest rates is so much, it makes it, I don't want to say unaffordable, makes it less attractive. So what do? Move in roommates. Throw bunk beds in a room, remodel a part of their house to make a den or a family room, a bedroom for the teenager, build out the garage. So instead of having move-up buyers creating a transaction where they sell a property, buy a property, and having retirement people sell a property, buy a property, what we have is the retirement lock and the interest rate lock that is further limiting supply beyond the fact that we had a decade where we had 20 million less homes built than every decade for the 5 decades before that. But why is it on purpose, right? It is like the world is physically actively working against you owning a home or buying your next rental, and it is. When we had the crash of 2020, we lowered the rates so much that we had stimulus, unemployment, extra unemployment, extended unemployment, all impacted by the pandemic. And I'm resisting the urge to call it a pandemic, even though that's what I usually call it. You had EIDL grants. If you had employees, you can get thousands of dollars. You had PPP money where businesses could borrow hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars and probably not even have to pay it back, which meant R&D, You had 100% depreciation, bonus depreciation. You had massive expansion that included a lot of hiring. And one of the main contributors to inflation is wage inflation. And a lot of people, we had over 4 million people a month during the Great Resignation, where they were jumping to different companies because instead of a 3 to 7% annual cost of living raise, you were getting a 15 to 20%. I'm going to steal you from my competition raise by changing companies. Very smart move for the employees. But wage inflation causes inflation. We actually had inflation with a 9 handle on it. There was a period of time where we had 9.1% inflation. And the Fed's goal is a 2% inflation rate. If we have 9% and it drops to 2%, hold on to your britches here. Get ready for the transparent oversharing. I'm out of stuff to make me talk softer. That's a sad day. If inflation drops from 9% to 2%, that doesn't mean things cost less. It means they cost more slower. So people waiting for inflation to come down to buy a house thinking, oh, I'll just pay less next year. No, it's going to cost more, but not as much more as it would have if inflation stayed high. The Fed wants a 2% or 2 to 3% inflation rate because when there's inflation, and this is the beauty of real estate, owning your own home or buying a rental, inflation makes you rich when you have debt. Inflation-based debt destruction. It's easier to pay off money in the future when that money has lost value because it's easier to acquire the money to pay off the debt. If you're a government in 30 trillion plus dollars in debt, you like inflation. If you're an investor with a couple $1 million in debt, and that's the reason why you don't have to work, you like inflation. So they want to lower it from 9% to 2%. And how do we do that? Well, we stop the PPP loans. We stop the EIDL grants, kind of. We institute them a couple of times. We stop the stimulus. And so we don't have as much wage inflation. We have a government actively trying to make you lose your job. The more unemployment they can cause, the less inflation we're going to have. The harder they make it for businesses to give raises, the less wage inflation we have, the less inflation we're going to have. Actively raising interest rates to curb inflation means making it harder to buy a house. And I've heard some, I want to say, unintelligent people who make an incorrect correlation of if interest rates come down, buying power goes up, so home prices go up. Makes sense. But then they say, if interest rates go up, every point that interest rates go up, your buying power goes down, so home prices will come down. And that's not how it works. Every time interest rates go up, the number of people who will buy goes down, so the transaction count goes down, but that doesn't mean prices come down, as we've seen. Had a bet last year with Michael Zuber from One Rental at a Time and Matt, the lumberjack landlord. Matt said prices would probably drop 10%. He had a really good equation to show that as luxury came down, that would look like all prices were coming down because it's such a big impact. But the home prices that we invest in, the first-time home buyer and the person buying a rental, those prices will actually go up, even though the annual metric would look like it came down. Michael Zuber said it would stay flat. I called for a 10% increase because of inflation. And it was at 5.1%, yet up year over year as of January. None of us were right. And that's the idea, is it doesn't matter. Don't time the market. The Fed is actively making it harder for you to buy. There's been less building. And yes, you're going to hear a lot of people talking about all the builds coming online right now because in 2020, people could borrow money to do builds. They can't do that anymore. And this one little blip of 1 or 2 years of building isn't going to impact the market enough to bring down prices. So home prices are high, interest rates are high. What are most people doing to find a house if you're going to buy a house? If you're in that position to move out of mom and dad's house, or you got a divorce and you got to go buy a place, or whatever your reasoning is, some people are going to buy less house, right? People use this term, housing is unaffordable. No, it's unaffordable to the person talking maybe, but it's not unaffordable. This is one of the most affordable times for housing because we have 5% down loans on single family, duplex, triplex, or fourplex across the board without having to use FHA. We have first-time homebuyer programs. We've got over, 13,000 vacant homes in little towns like Gary, Indiana that are literally empty. So people can buy houses. It's just not where you want to live. So one of the things people do is they'll buy less house. Instead of buying a 3 or a 4 bedroom, they'll buy a 2 bedroom and they'll make do with their family. They might have a home gym and office blended together instead of having a gym room and an office room. They're going to buy less house. The second thing is With remote work being more of an option than at any point in our lives, people can move out and buy out further. Sometimes it takes understanding that your company is committing to you working remotely, because a lot of remote workers are moving out from where they have to go for work, but they want to rent, which is driving up rental prices, but they're not driving up home prices as much because they might be afraid to buy because their company could call them back into the office. So the first thing is expand your search out a little bit further from the municipalities, because remote work is impacting the further out we can go. The second thing is, for a decade, I was using speed, right? I had 3 or 4 agents set up with auto searches, and they would come in, and whoever got me the deal I wanted first, I danced with the one who brought me. That's who got the deal. I wanted my offer in before a seller realized they were going to be inundated with offers. They were going to have people waiving contingencies, offering to name their kids after the seller. They were going over asking. If I can get my offer in, and then they took another offer, I would say, I understand you got a better offer. I totally understand. And I have no problem with that. I would like to leave my offer in second position in case that one falls through, because a lot of times people would make an over asking offer so that they could try to negotiate. But if I had my offer in second position, it gave a stop loss for that seller where I would get my deal. And half my portfolio was acquired from second position. Well, that's shifted now. What I've changed from doing is anything fast. Now I'm watching days on market. Look in your area, the market that you're looking for your house or your next rental, and watch how many days a property is on market. For me, I use the metric of 91 days, because you list a property for 90 days. If it's on 91 days, it means they've relisted. This is a seller who actually wants to sell, but they haven't gotten the offers that they wanted. So then I'll take a page out of Patrick Bet David's playbook, and I will make a disrespectful offer. I'll explain to my agent what I'm doing, the math behind it, and make sure they're okay with it, because they could make a few offers without much, action. Place I found was on the market over 100 days, was listed for 500. I offered 400. They countered 477. I offered 4. They countered 444. I offered 4. They went 422. I offered 4. And then I was going to walk away from the deal, and they accepted my 4. So I got a 20% discount off the price of the property by looking for something that was on the market longer, a little bit further out than normally where I invest. There will never be a year where it seems like it's easy to buy a house, because if it was, people would buy the house, which would drive the prices up, or cause so much inflation by driving the prices up that the Fed would think we need to curb this inflation, so let's raise the interest rates. It's never going to feel like a good time to buy or the right time to buy. But when you buy, after a long enough time period, you will always thank yourself. Because even today, in 2008, when we saw in some markets 30, 40, 50, in the Silicon Valley, 75% market crash in your area, is there anybody who would not like to buy a house today at 2008 prices? When we buy a home and we make a 30-year commitment to a mortgage, or when we buy a rental, we are not looking at, well, we do run the numbers for the cash on cash return for the first year. A buy and hold investor is thinking in decades, while most people are planning for the weekend. I do my live streams every Tuesday, 4 p.m. Pacific, where I answer all of the questions in the chat. Sometimes during these random live streams, I will see a question in the chat that I will make a video about, like I did the other day. So I hope this video at least made you think. Until my next video, thanks for coming to my Dion Talk.